Hey, when you're looking for your next job, take the one that you think you're going to fail at.
Assemble the council.
Welcome to episode 12 of the Cybersecurity Council podcast. Today we have an extended conversation for you with a leading CEO of cybersecurity. Also remember, our annual conference is coming up on 8 November at the Q2 Stadium in Austin, Texas.
All right, Andrew, it's great to have you here, man. And first and foremost, I just want to tell you, I've told you this privately, probably 5, 10, 15, 20 times, but I want to tell you publicly as well. Best work experience of my career was without question the time that I was able to work for and with you at Signal Sciences, obviously with Zane and Nick too, but I just an amazing experience, something that I cherish to this day. And I consider you a friend and a mentor and a lot of other things. So just thanks a ton for having the bravery to start a company that I was lucky enough to be a part of, and also for being here and joining us on the Cybersecurity Council.
Oh, thank you. You know me, I don't really take compliments well, so I'll just say thank you. And I'm happy to be on the show. And just, I don't know, it's good to see you as always.
Awesome, brother. Well, let's get going into some of these questions. A lot of people may not know this about you, but you were a collegiate swimmer at Stanford. And I want to know what your favorite stroke was, what your least favorite stroke was, and who your favorite swimmer was of all time, or is of all time.
Well, I swam distance freestyle, which for people that know swimming, like maniacs do that type of swimming. Like most people, if you get into swimming, you want to do sprint work because you're mostly lifting weights and trying to get really strong. And distance swimming, you're just in the pool and you're just like pounding the water for hours on end. So the only reason I did that is because I wasn't big enough or strong enough to be able to do the sprinting stuff. So I was like, well, this is my way to be able to be successful, is to do distance stuff. And I can essentially, like, you'll appreciate this. With distance swimming, you can just outwork people. Like if you're willing to just put the work in, guess what? Like you can be able to beat people. So that maybe give you a little insight into my long-term personality, but I don't know that I would say that I liked it the best, but it was certainly the thing that I was the best at. I wish I would have been better at sprinting races, but okay, so that's those two questions. Best favorite swimmer of all time. Ledecky is pretty amazing in terms of what she's been able to accomplish over her career, and like the thing with her is that it's a longevity thing. Like she was incredible. She was best in the world when she was 15, and she's been at 5 Olympics now. 4 Olympics. It's kind of unheard of for anyone, and especially unheard of for women. Like they tend to be like, hey, there's two groups. They sort of peak around specific ages and then they don't continue it. Like at this Olympics, she said she's going to go to the next one. I believe her. Like she's a beast.
Wow. That's pretty impressive, of course. Yeah. I think I know the answer to this question already too, but I want to confirm it and then hear the reasons why. What's your favorite collegiate sport at Stanford?
Okay, so when I was in school, this was 2002 to 2006. And leading up to even being in school, my parents went to Stanford. And so I had sort of been a fan of the sport for a long time. And the women's basketball team was incredible forever. And I grew up in Seattle, and I still live in Seattle now. I came back to be close to my parents when we started having kids. And we would go to the Stanford women's basketball team's games when they played University of Washington. And we got to meet all the players, and we met like Tara Vanderveer, who's the most winningest coach of all time in collegiate college basketball. And so I've always loved the women's basketball team, but I also, like when I was at school, the men's basketball team was amazing. They were number 1 in the country. And one of Stanford's, like the venue of the basketball stadium there, like is sort of known because the floor is bouncy. And it only seats, I don't know, like 10,000 people, maybe not even that, maybe like 8,000 people. So it's very intimate. And I got to go to a game. I still remember Tiger Woods was at this game. We stormed the court because they were playing Arizona, and Arizona was like the main rival that we had at the time. And like we won on a last second, like Hail Mary, essentially, right, from half court shot and every storm the court. So I would say that men's basketball, at least while I was at school, is by far my favorite. Subsequently, obviously, the football team's gotten better, and I've been a huge fan of theirs and been watching them as they've risen and now sort of fallen, and now they're hopefully sort of rising again. But yeah, I'd have to say my first love was women's basketball, but my main love has been men's basketball.
There you go. I love that. That wasn't what I thought you were going to say. But I too, having been a Duke guy, the basketball experience in college can be pretty amazing in those small atmospheres. I mean, there's not a lot like Cameron Indoor, but
Wild
it's very
energy.
similar in that it's, 8,000-10,000 people, but it feels like 5-10 times that when you're in there. So I'm curious to hear your take on this part too. Like, what about competitive sports, in your mind, trained you to become a better leader, CEO, founder?
Everything else after that seemed easy. I mean, the thing about collegiate sports is that, like, look, you're physically exhausted all the time. You're working really hard. And while people think it's physically exhausting, it's actually really mentally exhausting. And part of that is because of sleep. And so I'm learning this subsequently, and it's one of the things that I've sort of talked about very openly that, like, I recommend highly to people that are, certainly to people that are founders, but people that are just trying to be the best they can be at whatever it is that they're trying to be, whether it's a parent or a worker or a husband or whatever. Sleep is a absolute secret weapon to being able to be the best you can be. I did not get that when I was in school because I was just trying to keep up with swimming and with school, and guess what? Like, sleep went to the wayside. When I got out of doing that and I could get a bunch of sleep and I wasn't physically exhausted, working hard was part of who I was. It was the only way that, I sort of track back to what we said before. Like, for my specific type of swimming also, like, working hard was absolutely the way that you were able to be successful. And I love swimming in general because it's like the work you put in is the output that you're going to get. Like, there's no shortcuts with swimming. And it's not you don't have judges and stuff that are telling you how good you are. You don't even really have coaches like choosing. It's like, if your time is faster than the next person, like, you're going to be the one that's going to be in there or something, right? So I like that about it. It's very true. But as a result, like, yeah, I come out of school and I stopped swimming, and you start thinking about and entering your career and really thinking about what you want to prioritize and what's important to you. Not only do I have sort of a work ethic that comes along with being a collegiate athlete, but then you can create a lot of structure around it too, for how you go about achieving goals. And the last thing that I'll say, that Brian, you've been through this because you were a collegiate athlete as well, which is, I think there's sort of a trend in our generation of, like, really wanting short-term rewards. And the thing that I learned with swimming was, like, I would train for 6 months and have one competition.
Right.
And then I'd train for another 6 months and have another competition. And your benchmarks were 6 months apart, essentially. We do competitions and stuff in between that, but you were really thinking about, like, I am training now for 6 months from now. And having that type of mentality is something that I think is very, very unique in terms of understanding that I am investing in building something today that's going to have an impact many, many, many tomorrows from
Right.
now.
Long-time future reward.
Yeah, so I'd say there's all sorts of stuff, but, like, the first and easiest thing was just, like, I felt like I could outwork everybody because it was just easy. I was like, all I got to do is, like, mental stuff. Like, I'm not physically exhausted anymore. Like, yeah, I could stay here until 10 and just, like, grind it. And then, like, I learned in the future that, like, grinding wasn't really the value. Like, a lot of the value was, like, actually the qualitative work that you can do. And there's lots of different ways to do it. I'll tell you one more thing. The last thing is, there was a period in my swimming career where I was like, look, I got really serious. And this is in high school, because I was like, hey, this is leading up to, like, my recruiting year. So it was my junior year. And I said, hey, my junior year is kind of a really important year to be able to get really good times, because that's how you're going to get recruited in the future. And so I was like, look, I'm going to drop everything else. I'm going to, like, not do a bunch of social stuff. I'm not going to, I'm going to sort of drop a bunch of what I would call, like, sort of fun stuff and really focus on just, like, I'm going to get good grades and I'm going to get really good at swimming. And that year, both of the big meets that I had that were those 6 month meets, I got sick at both those meets. And, this is one of the things, like a lot of people don't talk about this, like going to the Olympics. Olympians are like, oh, this is like a once in a 4 year thing. And sometimes you just get bad luck and you get sick and you just off your game. You don't play well, right? And with swimming, it's like, if you're even just like a little bit off from a physical perspective, like you're not going to be on your time. It's like, cause it's all like milliseconds. So that was like devastating for me because I was like, God, I like sacrificed all this stuff from a social perspective. I didn't have as much fun as I had this year. And, the next year when I went into my senior year, I was sort of, you have this like kind of tiny little window at the beginning where it's like, if you do well at the beginning of the year, then you can still actually sort of get recruited on the backs of that. And I just said like, hey, you know what? Like this year, I'm just gonna have fun. I'm gonna do this stuff. I'm gonna hang out with my friends. I'm gonna stay up late. I'm not gonna get as much like sleep. I'm gonna do, and I swam lights out that entire year. And the lesson to me was like, look, it's important to be serious and to be focused and to have goals and to be prioritized and work hard and all those things. You gotta be having fun while you do it. Because I literally performed better when I was in just a good mood and I was having fun and I had a girlfriend and we like did, it's like the life pieces really fell into place for me. And so when I started the company, I think it was one of the things that I was like very clear about with both myself and with Zane and Nick, our co-founders, is that I was like, look, like I'm going to be laser focused on building this business, but I'm not going to sacrifice some of these other things that are really important to me to maintain having fun. And I don't think I always was great at that. I mean, like, the stress of the job is really hard to even explain, but like the ways that I was able to get and dig out of like really stressful situations was actually reminding myself, you got to go have fun. Like you got to build that back into what you're doing because otherwise, like that's literally the way not only to build yourself out of like being stressed, but it is the way to actually help me be better at executing. Like I was better at everything when I was making sure that I had fun.
For sure. That was a hard, as you would have probably guessed, when I was at Duke, that was a hard thing to do because we got like 2-3 paychecks a year.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of games, and it's hard to have fun when you're spending so much time, effort, and energy to be successful at something, and you're more often than not losing, far more often than not.
So I got a question. I got a question back for you then, like because in swimming for me, you might win a swim meet and you might win an event or something like that. And I didn't in college. Like I never won anything. I was never that good. And I swam with one of the amazing people. But like that was such a great lesson for me that it actually wasn't about winning. It was about trying to improve. And when I got into that mentality, the winning piece is great. I mean, if we won stuff, like you're not going to be upset about winning. But I could get third. I could get seventh. I could get 12th. But if I improved, that's what I felt good about, and like that's such a great lesson, like for life also. And like, look, you were a Duke, you guys might not have won a ton of games, but if you felt like you were like, I'm making progress, we're improving. I don't know, it's sort of like a different mentality, I think, on life.
Yeah, I tried the same thing. I tried to find the lemonade and the lemons, right? Which is like, okay, how did I play individually? Then, from there, how did our defense play? And our defense was pretty good. And I mean, we were definitely the strong part of the team. In the years that I was there, we struggled pretty mightily on offense. But yeah, it was, you got, like you were saying, you got to find the wins and the losses and then track those to keep yourself sane. In many ways, I think the time management component, like when I take people through this, they're kind of blown away unless you're ex-military like Scott. You wake up at 6 a.m., wake up at 5:30 a.m. to be at the gym at 6 to work out for an hour, to be in a shower at 7:15, to be at breakfast at 7:30, to be in your first class at 9, to be in classes from 9 to 1:30, 2 o'clock, somewhere in between there is lunch, to be in the football building again at 3, to watch film, get tape, do the things you need to do pre-practice. You're at practice from 4 to 6. You shower and go to dinner at 6:37. And then you have to go do whatever it is that's required of you at 7:00 p.m. when all of that is done to get a degree from a place like Duke or Stanford. Like what? Like all of that. Like you said, when I got to the working world, I was like, breeze.
I used to get nasty emails from my teachers because I'd be like falling asleep in class, and they're like you need to figure out how to like stay awake. And I was like, do you know? One of them, I was like, can I just walk you through my schedule? And like, you want to give me some advice for like how I should do this differently?
Yeah.
And they were
Not
like,
to mention
oh
you're an
my
18,
gosh.
19, yeah, 18, 19, 20-year-old who's not, I mean, look, still going through a lot of growths and, you know, whatever's bothering you mentally on top of like just physical, you know, being tired physically. So yeah, but that was a great answer. We'll dive out of sports, out of college, and into the working world where you've obviously had a ton of success. Started at Google, and then I don't think I've ever asked you this, like, what led you to Etsy, right? Because Etsy was a relatively unknown, you know, arts and crafts online marketplace. I think at the time that you went to work there, and you were a big bad Alphabet. So, like, what gave you the I'm going to leave Google and go join Etsy?
But I made a stop in between. I left Google. I went to join the Clinton Foundation and worked in Africa for a little over a year on medical health information systems in the country of Tanzania with their government. And I learned there that there's like a lot of like when I was working at Google, I worked in ads, like in the ad space. Um, not a lot of heart in that, I guess, is kind of like the easiest way to put it. I learned so much. I had like this incredible group of people that I worked with, probably the most talented group of people I've ever worked with in my life and probably ever will. And I learned a ton from them, a ton about business, but there wasn't a lot of soul in like the ad business, I guess. And so I left there and I was like, oh, I really, I want to do something, let's call it more meaningful. Went to work for the Clinton Foundation and the government of Tanzania. It was absolutely meaningful. It was just slow. Like, you're working in we were working through the government and working on, really hard problems there that are very hard to solve. And it was really slow. And we didn't use technology, but I got a lot of meaning out of the work. And so learning that, the next type of job I wanted to do, I wanted to get back into the tech sector. I knew like into the like very explicit tech sector, but I wanted to find something that I felt like had a little bit more meaning and it had a little bit more impact than working in the ad business. And so the other thing I learned moving to Africa was that you learn as much about where you live as you do about as you do from your job. And so the extreme of going to a place like rural Tanzania, which is where I lived, where I didn't have running water and power for half the year when I was living there, it was like really an extreme experience. I was like, what's another like really extreme experience? And I was like, you know what? I should go to New York because it's like the rural of the rural to the urban of the urban. And like, I couldn't imagine another like sort of more, anyway. So like I chose New York as the place that I wanted to go from like a life perspective. And then I tried to find companies there that sort of matched with what I was looking for. And Etsy's interesting. A lot of people know it for like this sort of arts and crafts piece. And like the big reason I went there is because they have a really interesting model where people can sell stuff from anywhere in the world and they can sell stuff to any people in the world. And the way in which their marketplace really is driven internationally is it's mostly second and third world countries who have really a lot of success selling things. And then it's mostly first world countries who are buying those things. And so you get some really interesting, like what I'd call microeconomic impacts for individuals. And that's what drew me to that business in the first place. And I was very, I didn't start working on that stuff, but I was lucky to be able to work on that the second half of my time there, which is like working on building our international business. And I got to visit a bunch of these people that are selling stuff and things like, Turkey and Latvia was one of the big countries that we had people selling things through. And so like going to some of these economies in Greece where like we just had these crazy stories where like Greek people that are selling stuff, they were like, we're trying to find in our tax code how to actually categorize what our business is because it didn't exist. And they literally had to work with the government to create a tax code to allow their business to be able to like A, exist, and B, for them to pay taxes. Because they literally brought like a checkbook to the tax man was like, I need to pay you some money because I'm doing this business. And they're like, no, this business, they didn't even believe them. They're like, that doesn't exist. You can't sell stuff to people in the UK. Like it did. So I don't know. Like that's what led me to Etsy, or at least to find it. But it's something that stayed with me for my whole career. And it's something like for security specifically, just kind of transitioning. I wish people talked more about the mission and the value of the work that we do in security. And look, like it is there's a lot of money to be made in the business with a lot of like dollars that get invested into businesses in the space. But I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about cybersecurity is there's no there's no police for this. Like if you get robbed of something digital on a website, you're not going to go down to your police station and report it. Maybe you will, and they will have no means to do anything to help you or protect you. And so the companies that are working in the space and the CISOs that are working in-house at the various companies around the world, like we're the front lines, but there's no cavalry. Like we're the front lines and the back line and the middle line, and that's it. And so the work that we do, it's not hyperbole to say like we're protecting the world's data, like in this industry. And there's certainly a lot of people that work in government work, and they're doing great work in government work. There's just not enough.
We talk about that a lot in our council. And, wake up every day, you're defending our systems, our data, our infrastructure. And really
it's mission driven work. And I wish it was both talked about more, but then also like recognized more for the people that are on the front lines doing this stuff. Like you're not a police officer. I get that. Like, and you're not putting yourself in the line of fire. But there is stuff where you're doing things where you're working against a human adversary, and there's not a lot of other jobs that are like that in the space, and it takes a toll on people.
Totally. Well, what a great decision to go from one polar opposite of no running water in Tanzania to the mass that is in New York City and Manhattan, and finding your way to Etsy, because right, that's where you met Nick and Zane. Was there a moment in time that you can recall while at Etsy where you worked with the two of them, or where you said like, those two guys, I got to work with those two guys? And, what advice would you give to, founders when they're considering, founding a company with one or two other people?
If you can find two other people to found a company with, I think 3 is really an ideal number. The data shows that most of the time when you found something, and you have multiple founders in an in a group, somebody is going to drop out. Like, and I literally had multiple people tell me like, I will bet you that one of the 3 of you is not going to be there in a year. And I was like, I'll take that bet all day. Like, and we were together from the beginning until the end, and we still talk all the time, like almost every day, like all 3 of us. And I don't know that there was like a specific moment, but and I actually think this is the strength of it, is that like we worked together for 2 years, and we worked together on very specific projects, and we did some fraud and security work and developing features and then launching those features. Like we did that, but then we actually kind of went our separate ways, and we started managing different groups within the organization itself, because we kind of all grew up in leadership areas in different parts of the business. And then we would collaborate from a management perspective in that relationship on different things, but we weren't necessarily working together day to day on that. But I actually think seeing that and being able to experience those different types of roles where we work together was really, really important to understanding like what the future of what our relationships might look like over time. And guess what? When you start a company, your relationships and your roles evolve massively over. Look, they say the best predictor of the future is the past. And for us, we got to experience the past working together already through these different types of functional roles within an organization that was growing and moving and changing and political. And I mean, like, it's all sorts of different stuff that we were able to see. And so we were able to simulate, I think, beforehand what working together would look like later. And so there's this book that's called The Founder's Dilemma that I suggest to anybody that's starting a company. And it's like a HBS professor that wrote this, and he goes through a data set of companies where he's basically trying to find like, what are the characteristics of founding teams that potentially lead to success or are correlative or like whatever. And like one of the things he talks about is the most common background of what leads to people starting companies and founding things together is you're either family or friend. But the best predictor of success is if you've worked together before. And actually, like founding teams that have friends and family, not so great in terms of outcomes, but most common because I think there's a lot of trust is there. And so, like the thing that I try to tell people is like, look, if you're founding a company, the ideal people to start it with are people that you've had some work experience with before, because you kind of know what that relationship's going to look like. And so we not only had that, we had that in spades because we'd done it for a couple of years across multiple different functional things. So for me, the team was really important for me to even make the decision to start the company, because honestly, like the ideas in the space, like I was not an expert in cybersecurity before, like Nick and Zane were. And so like they somehow were like convinced me to run the company. The joke I think is on me actually in that scenario, but I trusted them and I knew they were experts and we worked on it together and they trusted me because they knew what I was bringing to the table too. Although that, at the funny side note, coming back to like the first questions you were asking about the sports stuff, they didn't know that in my background. They actually didn't know me to be a competitive person, Brian. They didn't know that because my first job out of school was actually in sales, and they didn't know that either. So I was like, why did you want me to be the CEO? Like, you didn't know any of this stuff about me.
That's hysterical. Yeah, I like to use examples, and to me, that feels a lot like what you just went through with you, Nick and Zane. And not only did you all date, before you as a part of a relationship, but you also lived together, right? And then you got married, right? And I feel like in a relationship perspective, like it's good to date for a while, it's good to live together for a while, and then it's good to probably get married. And it seems like you guys did all that professionally before you joined forces.
And then I'll say it again, because I've said this throughout my whole career: best predictor of the future is the past. And like, this is true for all sorts of things, but absolutely, if you're hiring people or you're making big life decisions, like the more you can simulate the future.
Great advice. Cool. So yeah, so you guys, obviously, a lot of people know this, some people don't. Etsy and Netflix were kind of the leaders in the DevOps movement during the period that you guys were at Etsy. And you realized, right, that you couldn't use the legacy web application firewalls that were out there because you were constantly changing the website. And there was a lot of false positives and manual tuning that went along with the web application firewalls of the time. And so you all put your heads together and built something that solved your own problem, which ultimately ended up solving a lot of other companies' problems, because that you guys were trendsetters in a way from a DevOps and cloud first or cloud only perspective from an infrastructure standpoint. So did you all see that? I mean, when you were building the solution to use at Etsy, were you like, other people are going to have this problem, other companies are going to have this same problem that we have, and we could ultimately end up with software that we can sell and start our own company around?
I'd like to say yes and be like, oh, we just knew we were onto something immediately. And the reality is no, for two reasons. One, the type of development work that was happening at Etsy, that was essentially the short version of it. Like, DevOps comes with a lot of baggage now, I think, from like what that means. And it's been commandeered to mean a lot of different things. But I think the short version for us was always like, let's try to get the operations teams and the development teams to work better together so that we can ship faster. Like that was the core thing. And faster shipping tends to terrify security people. And so as we were building our security program in the context of that, we knew that that was the underlying goal of the company. And so as Nick and Zane were trying to come up with solutions for how to enable that speed, that was such an important part of like that was literally like almost like a company strategy. Was the way in which the company was going to win was going to be by having a really fast development speed, which is, I think that has now become very common and popular from a technology strategy perspective, I think, like throughout the industry. But at the time, it was extreme, to say the least. And so I think as we were building stuff there, it was more that given that type of mandate, we were able to identify and come up with some creative solutions to that problem that the industry moved towards. And so I think two things happened sort of like that allowed us to kind of understand like, hey, we can actually do this thing. One, we just like did a good job like innovating and coming up with some ideas that were really based out of some of the work that the operations team was doing to enable the development team to ship faster, which at its core was let's create visibility and alerting to identify when problems are happening in the code that we are shipping such that we can make changes quickly and solve the problems as they happen. We applied that same model to security and basically said, okay, great, let's get some monitoring into what's actually happening on the attack surface, essentially for the live web app that we had. And once we have that visibility, then we feel like we can use our fast development speeds to solve problems quickly before the attackers can take advantage of it, right? Like that was the switch around it. And it just so turns out that like the rest of the industry was like, I want that even if I'm not moving fast, right? Like I would like to know what attackers are actively doing on my website. Like even if it's going to take 3 months to actually solve a problem and get a patch, into my pipeline, I'd still rather know than not know. And then number two, like everybody was actually trying to speed up from an engineering perspective to be able to actually enable faster like solutions to these things. So I think the combination of those two things, plus Nick and Zane, are one of their superpowers is they're particularly good at communicating. And they liked giving talks, they liked giving back. And it was a big part of the ethos of Etsy also was like the innovations that we were doing on the tech side, we wanted to give that back to the community. Selfishly, it was for being able to recruit better, but also there was, an altruistic component of this as well, which is like we wanted to have an impact on the industry as well. And so I think as we gave talks and we got feedback from people after the talks and saying like, I really want this thing, those are the initial seeds that were sort of planted for us of saying like, hey, this could be a business, but B, this could have a really big impact for the industry to help kind of move this area of security a little bit forward.
It's interesting. I love hearing some of this stuff because I feel like I know some of it, but I don't know a lot of it. So yeah, one of the things that stuck out to me recently, obviously you and Nick and Zane went through a lot of planning and discussions around founding the company, who was going to take on what roles. And you even alluded to the fact that the joke was on you and in some way earlier in this discussion for being named the CEO. I'm curious, what age did you take on that responsibility? How old were you?
I turned 30 that year.
Okay. Wow. So for sports people, you were the Sean McVay of security startup found CEOs. Essentially.
I was on a panel at Black Hat this past year, and I was with George Kurtz, and we were talking about like what's the average age of a CEO that makes a successful company, like the average age when they start the company, and the average age is 42.
Right. So way younger than the average age.
Yeah. Again, and so like I think you're right. I think the joke is on me a little bit because it was a rough 10 years. I had a lot to learn, and I got very fortunate and lucky along the way, but like
quite a decade, one you'll never forget. So you also had a LinkedIn post recently on this topic, right? And I'm curious, what would you stress to any founder that they like fully consider before they lean into or accept taking on that? They're going to found a company. Now you have to decide what your job is at the company, and somebody's got to be the CEO. And I think you had a big post on this recently where you outlined like there's a lot of things to think about when you're going to slap that CEO title on yourself. Is there any one or two things you'd really say, hey, think long and hard about these things?
Yeah. And most of this is actually incredible advice that I got along the way. Cause, one of the things I would just suggest to anybody that's thinking about starting a company to do is talk to other people that have done it. Somebody told me this quote. I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes, but it's essentially like, you can learn the easy way, you can learn the hard way, or you can not learn. And not learning is not an option. And so ideally you learn the easy way instead of the hard way. And my advice for how you learn the easy way is learning from other people and their experiences. That doesn't always work. And you have to learn the hard way sometimes, but like if you're not learning at all, like forget it. So if you're going to start a company, you need to be really open to learning and like be able to adjust. Now that's particularly hard when it's like you're also required to have a vision and have conviction and to lead and I think it's actually one of the things that I'm not great at like talking well about myself, but I think it's one of the things that I did particularly well, which is like I have strong opinions about things, but I'm actually quite open to people if they want to challenge that and change my mind on things. And that's a tough thing to do. But sorry, coming back to your original question, advice. If you want to take on the CEO role, you're doing sales. I think that's the post that you were alluding to, and like you're selling to customers, obviously. You're selling to investors. That one's kind of obvious also. But you're selling to I had to sell you to join the company, right? Like I took you down the street, we got a beer. I was like, how am I gonna be able to like get this guy to like it? And you're selling and I'm selling myself in the context of that, right? Like and then I'm selling to the press when we're talking about stories about the company. You're selling to analysts when they're asking about the direction of your company and where you're going. You're selling to your internal team all the time because you're giving them a vision about where we're going, right? And so somebody told me this was they're like, if you're not into sales, CEO is not the right role for you, which is totally, I mean, it's totally fine if that's not your thing. And also, by the way, like you don't have to be good at it. You just have to be willing to learn. And then you got to be dogged in your approach to trying to learn that stuff. Because there's all sorts of stuff as a CEO that you're just not going to know because it's like a really tough role. You're supposed to know everything about everything. And like, you just don't, you'll never really know that. So like, yeah, like you also have to be sort of comfortable with failure and not being great at things, like, which is important. The other advice that I've gotten was like, when you sign up to join a startup, and whether or not you're a CEO or not, like it doesn't really matter, I guess, in some ways, but like you need to think about this in terms of a 10-year commitment. Like if it goes well, it's going to be 10 years. If it doesn't go well, it might be 10 years also. And I think that's where like the real needle to thread in the context of that is like, what's your risk appetite? And I think there's some real hard conversations that people need to have with themselves and with their families about like, what's the financial risk appetite that we have as a family and how are we going to be able to do this? Because this isn't like let's dip our toe in the water thing and see if it works for 6 months. Like if that's the mentality, it's not going to work, right? It's more of like, are we willing and can we have a family or have a life in the context of knowing that like I might commit to 5 years of this and not get anything out of it financially because odds are you're not. Then the last piece is just like the role of CEO specifically, it's not awesome. Like the way I describe it is when you hire the right people, you manage them correctly. Well, not correctly, but if you manage them well, it means that you are pushing a lot of decisions down to them to make. And most of the decisions that they'll make is they're like, hey, let's evaluate the scenario. We think this is the best outcome of the scenario. We're going to present that back to the CEO and the leadership team, and they're going to rubber stamp it and say, okay, great. I didn't have to think about that. Like, there's a good outcome and there's a bad outcome, and that's what we're going to do. And they don't bring that decision to me to make, right? So the stuff that comes to me is we have no idea. There's two potential outcomes that we might do, and we don't know what's going to happen. And we need you to make a decision because we just don't know. That's the good scenario. The bad scenario is we have to make two decisions, or we have to make a decision and there's two potential outcomes and both outcomes are crappy. Can you choose the least crappy one? So like, if you do your job right, you're making decisions often, but you're making really, really nebulous decisions or you're choosing between the best of two bad outcomes.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and people don't really describe it like that very often, but like it's a lot of what the job ends up being.
Man. Yeah. It's a lot of info for anybody considering being a CEO and founder. Yeah.
Well,
But hey,
look, look here, the upshot is, and what I tell people is like, look, if you're able to get through all of those decisions and you're kind of like, no, I still feel like I can do this. It typically is from people that are just driven to learn. And if your goal is like, hey, I want to take this on because I want the challenge of trying to like stretch myself and learn as much as possible. And most of my career up until this point was like, that's how I made decisions. Like it was great advice when I was like 20. Or sorry, when I was like 23 from one of my managers at Google. And he said, hey, when you're looking for your next job, take the one that you think you're going to fail at. If you're in the place to even be offered that job. And like, if you do fail it, okay, but like, you learn so much more through failure than you learn through success. You learn very little, I think, through success, and you learn a lot through failures. I was a glutton for punishment, and I did that too many times. And then I became the CEO. So then I had 10 years of that. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you did a great job at it. As hard as you just made it sound, you didn't make it feel like it was that hard when you were doing it, at least when in our interactions.
So I'm glad you said that. And I've heard that from other employees and stuff that work for us. They were like, it didn't seem hard. And I was like, that's actually part of the hard part, is that I got to show up every day with a smile on my face and an easy energy. And I had to coach myself on that every time I stepped in the office. It was like, I got to be on and positive and happy every day, despite the fact that I rarely felt like that.
You got to be the duck on the pond, right? It doesn't look like it's moving above water, but underneath the feet are kicking.
Like, you're not going to have people that are higher than where I am. Like, it's like, if I'm here and I'm like, hey, we're doing great. Like, but if I'm low, like, people can go way lower. Because our brains are oriented to start, like, we're looking for cautious things, and we're trying to find things to worry about all the time. And like, I might be happy and you could be worried, but if I'm worried, you're not going to be happy. Right? Like, if you can tell that I've got nervous energy, why would you not have nervous energy?
Totally.
Right?
Mine will probably be worse because you showed some, Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. So you guys did a great job, in my opinion. I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but you guys did a great job in raising money. Looking back on it, hindsight is 2020, but I kind of had an idea where we were from a revenue perspective once I was inside the business. And, you guys went out and raised, a seed round and an A round and a B round and a C round. And they were good raises, but they never, looking back on it, and they were from major, VCs like Index and CRV and Lead Edge. But like, there's been this trend lately in the last 3 or 4 years of over raise, like just raise as much money as possible, and let's go see what happens. And you all never did that. And when I look back on it now, I'm like, well, that was really, really, really wise for 3 first-time founders, because I'm sure there were rounds you went into where you could have raised double or maybe more than what you actually decided to raise. What was it that made you guys go, let's only go get what we need and get through what we see to be the next stage of the business? And then if we need to raise more at that point, we will. And if we don't, we won't.
There's a lot of things that went into that. The short version is, I think we valued the equity and the ownership of the company. And I think we sort of knew that we were onto something relatively early on. And Nick is good at math. Like, the math isn't that hard on this stuff, but like, when you actually sit down and do the math on, like, dilution and ownership and stuff over time, like, let's say we sold 12% of the company in the first round instead of 15% of the company. That has like a really big impact down the line by saving that additional 3% of selling the company now versus being able to do it later. And like, look, I'll be the first one to admit that like the reason why we were able to continue to be quite good at both raising, but then not doing extremely dilutive raising. And by the way, like, a lot of people don't understand like the way that fundraising works, which is like, if you raise more dollars, it's not because you have more interest than other people. And maybe you do have more interest in other companies, but a big part of it is like, you just sell a bigger percentage of your company. Like, and so I think that for us, like, even just understanding that basic concept, which is like, hey, if you want to maintain more ownership for you and your employees in the company over time, raise less money, like literally raise less dollars. And each time you raise money, you're essentially selling ownership in the company at a specific rate. And so if you imagine, like, and you sell your seed rate, your seed shares for the value of the company at that point was $10 million. I'm making these numbers up. 2 years later, you sell another 10% of the company, and the value of the company at that point is, let's say, $40 million. You are raising you get to raise that amount of money at a much lower rate in terms of how much you have to sell the company to be able to get that many dollars in the company. So it's like it when you know how it works, it makes sense. But if you don't know how it works, it's really easy to just kind of get caught up with like, yeah, I'll raise more because why not? And investors want you to raise more because they want to own more of your company. And so like, I think there was some of it of just like understanding the game, but I think like some of it was really having a lot of confidence both in our team that I thought that like 18 months from now, if we raise again, I believe that the company's going to be worth more. And so why would I raise a bunch of money now when I think that I'll be able to raise some more of that money in the future? And by the way, like if you raise $10 million on January 1st, you can't spend it on January 2nd. Like it actually takes time to spend this money. So it never made sense to me. I was like, why would I have a big amount of money in the bank when I literally can't actively spend it? Let's wait to get more money in the future when we have the ability to even spend this money in the first place. So I think we got a lot smarter about this over time, but the basic concepts are really true at the beginning as they are later on, which is just like the more money you raise, it typically means the more of your company you're selling along the way.
You said something there I want to ask. That's really insightful, by the way. You said something in there that I want to ask a second kind of follow-up question to. We knew we had something special. What, is there a moment in time where you knew that? Or was it just an additive of a few things that happened in a window of time?
There was a very, very specific moment that I can like recall. And we were in the offices of one of the biggest companies in the world and their security team, and they had reached out to us proactively and said, "Hey, we heard you're working on something cool. Can you come in and talk to us about it?" And we went, and we were sort of laughing. We're like, "Well, sure, we'll tell them about our pet project. That's nothing. That like, one of the biggest companies in the world, like must have this and way more." We were literally going into it being like, oh, we can learn from them about how they do it way better than us, right? And we went in, and the response is basically just like, we don't have this at all on anything, and I want it on everything. Now, the funny thing is, like, they didn't become a customer right away. Like, it was 3 years after that. We came out of that meeting where it's like, oh my gosh, like, we're gonna, like, this is everything. But, like, I think the biggest thing was just like, look, the biggest, best companies in the world didn't have the capabilities we were talking about, and they wanted them. And I think we knew that there was like a real need in the market at that point for what we were building in a way that like, this is again, like this sort of, as we were building this stuff in-house at Etsy, we just kind of stumbled over, it was just like, hey, we need this kind of capability. It makes sense to us. Like, let's go try to build some of this stuff with our sort of small ragtag team of engineers that we had out there. And it turns out like, almost no security teams had any engineers to do any type of product development. So that was super unique. But then I think we actually had some really insightful, unique stuff that we stumbled on. Yeah, again, even like the biggest companies in the world didn't have. So I think that experience was, I came out of that and I was like, let's not screw this up.
No, I remember our website when I came to work for you all, it was like, said like next to nothing, and it had like a bunch of awesome logos. I know they're doing something in web application security. I think it's a web application firewall, but they got a bunch of companies down here that seem to be prescribing to whatever it is. So I'm in,
I wish we were a lot better at marketing. That's one thing that when I talk to other companies that we're now investing in, or I'm trying to help out, like I'm like marketing at the beginning. And like, we did not do a great job with that, but we did a great job with product, and it worked out. And we did a great job of hiring people like you that can come in and help us continue to sell to other people. We had some things going for us. There were definitely some things that we had a lot to learn.
Yeah, but that's any founder. So we hit on not over raising and being wise about what raising money means at different times in the development of the company. Are there any other do's and don'ts, like quick do's and don'ts you would tell founders today? Like, don't do this when you go raise, do this when you raise.
I published a 5-part series on reducing dilution for founders as they're thinking about fundraising. I'm trying to remember what the 5 things. And there's actually a bunch of different. It's a lot of things to think about, I think, as you're doing it, and when you're doing fundraising. Anybody who's listening, if you're interested, just ping me. I'll point you towards it. You can sort of sift through on LinkedIn and try to find it at some point, but it's kind of hard to at some point. But I would say in general, like the more you raise, the more you're going to dilute. making sure that you build the right amount of a pool of stock that you're going to give out to your employees that you're gonna hire over, let's call it, the next 18 months. Like, you want to have a good idea of what you're doing when you're building that stock pool. Sorry, that's like a nuanced, like, little thing, but like, it actually matters, and we can go into depth on that. We could do a whole other podcast on this, Brian, because like, I can go through like a bunch of detail on this stuff, but like, understanding how you build, because what you do is you end up saying like, hey, we're going to build a pool of stock that we're going to have to be able to allocate to new employees that we're hiring. And if you don't have a plan for who you're hiring, you don't know how big that pool needs to be, essentially. And so if you're working with investors and you don't have that plan, like, the investors will be like, hey, let's just make this big stock pool. And it ends up being really big. And like, it's bigger than you need typically.
Cool. Yeah.
But the last thing I would say is like, most founders don't have experience fundraising, and you're fundraising from people where it's their whole job and it has been for 10 years. And like, you like analogies, and you like sports analogies. So the thing that I used to say is, I was like, it feels like I'm going into a basketball game with Kobe Bryant, and I like played a little bit of high school ball, and I have no idea what I'm in for. And so like, what I suggest is having like a great lawyer, because a lawyer can be your coach, because they're doing this stuff every day. They might actually be more active about doing this stuff than even the investors are. Because the investors might do 2 deals a year, the lawyers might do 2 deals a day or 2 deals a week. So like, if you have somebody on your team that is an incredible lawyer, and most people don't think about this. Most people think like, lawyers, like, I want to spend as little time with them as possible, because they're going to be like charging me, to do this, this, and this. And like, they're not going to give me advice. It's like, no, if you don't have a lawyer that's giving you great advice in your fundraise, you have the wrong lawyer. Like, 100%. And like, Brian, you and I, we talked about this, but like, for people out there, if you're thinking about starting a company and you don't know what I'm talking about, contact me and I will let you know good lawyers to talk to.
Stop what you're doing and reach out to Andrew for some help with lawyers.
If you, the advice I tell people is like, if your first call and your brain is not like, I need to go talk to my lawyer and get some advice about this, like, you're working with the wrong team.
So that brings us to a great kind of next topic, which is telling us, we haven't asked you yet, tell us about Aviso Ventures, right? I mean, you were a founder, you went on the fundraising trail, you raised a bunch of different rounds for SigSci, you sold SigSci, operated it, fasted for a few years to see that through, and then started your own fund. Give us a little insight into the primary goal of the fund, short and long-term goals, anything you'd like listeners to know about Aviso.
So Aviso is it's essentially Spanish for advice, like, that's the word. And at its core, you can get money from a lot of people. You can't necessarily, well, you can get advice from a lot of people, but we think we have good advice to be able to give, at least based on our experience of being able to build a company and go through the process. And look, before we built the company, we were CISOs in-house, and so we were actually buying some of the stuff. After we sold the company, we helped to like evaluate other companies that the company that bought us might want to buy also. And so we should have been on a bunch of different parts of the like, we've actually like operated in the role of a bunch of different parts of this industry, and so I think as a result, we tend to have a very unique perspective on being able to evaluate companies in areas that we think have opportunity and have really great financial opportunities to be able to invest, and then B, like, once we do invest, or even if we don't invest, we just think that we have the ability to be able to add value to the companies and to the founders as they're growing their own business through lots of different phases of the business, not just at the beginning, but beyond that. And so I think like that like should have been coming as a Viso for me, for why I was interested in doing it. A lot of people, look, after you sell the company, you've invested so much of your time and energy and focus for so many years that it's pretty jarring going from that and saying, this is essentially my life. And a lot of people build an identity around being a founder or being a CEO or something like that. And I think like, it's one of the other things that's like, you probably will appreciate this, Brian, but like, it's very similar then to being an athlete. You build your entire life around being good at that thing. And when you stop doing it, a lot of the guys that I swam with and a lot of the guys that I've known that like swam in college, they had a really hard transition to like reorienting their identity and what their focus and what their goals and what their life was about going forward. And so I think having gone through that experience for me has made it a lot easier to go through this experience of like leaving being, the founder of a company and a team and building this incredible group of people that I got to work with and work alongside, and then thinking about what's next. And for me, like, it's different for everybody. But I think there were a couple of key things that I wanted to make sure that I was able to like do in the next thing afterwards. But a big part of it was I felt like, oh, God, I've done so much learning over the last 10 years building this company. I really felt the responsibility to find something that would allow me to pass that learning on. And I think what other founders do, I think the most common route for other founders is they go and they start another company. And I think like that's a great way to learn and sorry, take your learning and reapply it to a new business. Um, I personally was in the position where I didn't want to have all the stress that came along with doing that. Again, I was like, I've done that. And, the easiest business to build again would be another cybersecurity business, right? And to me, man, life is short.
Yeah, you read that book, right? Like,
Yeah. And I really value variety and for the people that know me, they know that like I've done all sorts of, even talking today, I was like, yeah, I was working on medical health information systems and then I started a cybersecurity company. Like, duh, like that's what people do. And so for me, I was like, look, I want to be able to take the lessons learned. I want to be able to make use and value of that, but I don't want to do what I just did. And so I had been doing some individual investing. I had done some advising work, and I still sit on some boards and do some advising work also. But like the role of investor was an actual job. And the beauty is, so Nick and I started Aviso, and it's a brand. It is a company. A lot of people think like investing is a totally different business and it's super easy and it's like, all you do is sit there and in your palace and you decide who gets deemed worthy of your money and all this stuff. It's like that is not the case when you start your own fund for sure. There may be shades of that in truth of like other type of roles in investing. If you go and work for another house, like an investing house where they raise their own money, but like if you're starting your own, it's a business, like, and it has a brand, and you have to do marketing, and you have to do sales development work, and you've got to. I mean, there's also, and you have to think about what your product is and how you differentiate your product, both to potential founders that you're investing in and to LPs that you're trying to raise money from. I mean, it's a lot more. I mean, Nick and I maybe have made it more complicated than others because I think we think really deeply about these things and we want to like do it really well. And we've started learning that we are nerds about these things. So that's been a learning curve for us also. But like, it's interesting. Like it's a real another great challenge to be able to work on. And it's just different than the last one that we did, but it really builds on a lot of the lessons that we had in the last one. So it was a nice combination of the continuation of the lessons learned that we felt like we got to build on and continue to like pass on those lessons learned to other, but I still get to learn because I'm still like, so we get back to this, like, why be a CEO? Are you into learning? Guess what? Like I am, and so I'm going to keep working on stuff that's going to like, I'm going to be in the position to learn. So
a lot of that resonated with me, but you nailed it with the attachment to identity piece, right? Like, and I'm trying to imagine that for you, decade of building and running SigSci, then getting out of it, staying in Fastly for a bit, and then like, what now? Your day was just full all the time. You were always going, and then it's like, then you don't have much to do, and it's like, what do I do now? Like,
well, then it makes everything feel easy again, right? I mean, just like we talked about with you're going from football to work and job. I mean, like everything seems easier afterwards. Like, oh man, when you're working out super hard for 10 years on this business, which, that's what you as a metaphor, like you're working out super hard all the time. I still actually work a ton. And my wife's like, why are you working so much? And I was like, it doesn't feel like I'm working a lot. And she's like, you're working a lot. And like, but to me, it doesn't feel hard because it's like this. I tell founders this all the time. I was like, hey, I get to give you advice. You're the one that has to go do it. Like you're doing the hard job, like, and I'm cheering the sidelines, and I'm going to give you as much support as I possibly can. But like, your job is exponentially harder than mine is, right?
It's in your DNA now. Just the hard work part of it. So that's a good kind of lead into like, what are there specific qualities that you and Nick look for when you're thinking about investing in a company?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot. I think this is actually something that we've learned a lot of just by, we look at different companies, and almost every company there's things that we really love when we look at companies, and we look at what they're doing. And it's the job of an investor, by and large, is you say no. And there's a lot of people that like don't understand that about investing. And if they get into going from like angel investing into full-time investing, I was talking to somebody about this like 2 days ago, and they were saying, yeah, I just really don't like how negative the job feels. And I said, like, look, like my approach to this stuff is, and I tell founders this when we have calls. I was like, I don't know if I can invest in your company, but my goal in this conversation is to like help you somehow in this conversation. That might be with money, it might be with advice, it might be whatever, but like that's my goal. And like I continue to have that goal because yeah, we're not gonna be able to invest in everything for a lot of different reasons. But I think one of the things that like we've sort of narrowed down into is that, people talking about product market fit all the time with like companies, and have you achieved product market fit? And one of the things that I've talked to Nick about a bunch more recently is like there's like a team product fit also. And so when we're looking at the company, we're like, does this team match the product? Or maybe it's like team market fit. And I think that's where we are able to really narrow in on like, helping them define what their market should be, and or what their market is, or what their product is also. But like, and then for us, I think the things that we really like are like a team that we think fits the problem that they're going after. A really common thing to ask investors is like, hey, what's a hot space? Like what's something you really like right now in the industry? It's a really, really common question, right? And there's a lot of investors that are like, hey, I've really, really thought deeply about a bunch of these different areas of the market, and we have a thesis, and we're looking for a company essentially that matches the thesis that we have. And I would say, like, by and large, Nick and I think that there are opportunities in any type of market. I mean, if we build a company in the WAF space that was successful, like, we have to believe in this, right? Like, because that's a space that's been around for 25 years. People have seen tons and tons of iterations of it. We came up with a new iteration, and we were able to be successful in that. And so I think the reason why we were is because we had a very unique background, a very unique team to go after and try to solve that market. And I think we really believe that about almost any market. And so when we're looking for the future of the businesses that we're trying to invest in, we really believe in trying to look for that. Is the team very unique about being able to match and identify and tackle the specific market that they're going after?
Man, that's super insightful. And I always bring it back to sports, but like I've never heard anybody kind of go through it that way. It's always product market fit. It's never product team fit. And, if you look at a coaching staff, for football is my passion and my moderate area of expertise. If I loved the head coach and hated the defensive and offensive coordinators, I'd be like, I don't have a lot of confidence in that team, or vice versa. If I didn't really like the head coach, but I loved the offensive and defensive coordinators, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in that team. But if you love all three, well, okay, yeah, like that's a team that I would want to be a part of, or an organization that I would want to join, or whatever, right? So it's really good. And you literally took the words out of my mouth with my next question. So I don't even know if I want to ask it now, but other than AI, is there a product category or part of the market that you feel is one that's, hot or gathering steam? And if there's not one, then it is what it is. Back to your thesis of, we look for good products and great teams, or great products and great teams, or whatever.
Well, let me touch on AI for a second, because my perspective on this has changed a little bit over time. Which is, I think, like when it was super hyped, let's call it like 12 months ago or a year ago, it really was like this really intense hype cycle that was happening. And I think we're getting to a point where there's some maturity in the space, and I'm starting to believe and see a lot more very specific use cases that people are utilizing AI to do meaningful impact work. Before it was kind of like, oh, we have this idea and this thought, and maybe it'll have an impact. And like, I didn't see a lot of examples of that before. And now I'm seeing more examples of people actually putting AI to work to actually solve real problems, which is exciting, I think, for the industry. And it's something that like we knew was going to happen. I didn't know how fast it was going to happen, but it's happening quite fast. the thing is with that then also is that the industry is moving so quickly that like the solutions that people and teams are coming up with today for whole businesses are becoming obsolete really quickly also. And so like this is again where I think product team fit really matters. Even in that context, we've been very lucky to and fortunate to invest in a couple of companies that have AI in kind of their business model and what they're going after. The teams that we've invested in, they had deep experience in working in AI way before it was exciting. Like, and way before it got all this hype. And like, so we were like, look, you are true experts in this space. The fact that it's in AI is sort of irrelevant to us in the sense that like, hey, I'm excited about AI. And yes, there's like, a lot of moving pieces in the space and there's a lot of like tailwinds essentially is the word that the industry uses of saying that like, this industry is really going to grow as a market. But we were like, we love how much of deep expertise you're bringing to this problem already. And that would apply to essentially sort of any team that we have. So like, I think there is something sort of special in terms of the future of the market of the problems in AI that are happening. But I would sort of caution people into saying like, it is moving so quickly that it's really hard to predict, I think, where those spaces are going. But it doesn't change the fact that like, we still look for teams that have really deep expertise, specifically in the part of the market and the part of products that they're trying to build.
That kind of takes us start to finish there. I mean, I've known you for a long time, and I feel like we've had a lot of conversations, some of it about our work together and the work that you've done since then. And I feel like every time we have a conversation, I learn a little bit more stuff that I didn't know, stuff that's going to help me and hopefully help a lot of people listening to this. We'll close with one question because I got to get you on record. I think the Cardinal are 1-1 on the gridiron so far through the year. I need a prediction for their final record from you. Record, Mr. Andrew Peterson.
I've looked at this a bunch because I've looked at their schedule and it's going to be tough. It's a little, to me, it's fun that they're in the ACC this year because there's a lot of things that like, I haven't seen a lot of these teams. We haven't played a lot of these teams. So there's a lot of unpredictability with the year. And if you look at Vegas and the lines that they've had, the line is 3.5, which is the lowest in the ACC. Last year it was 2.5. They had 3 wins last year. The year before that they had 1 win, I think, before that. I want to say that they improved this year. They get more than 3 wins. I think that they're going to be probably 4 to 5 wins this year is where we're going to end up. But it's a building year. This is the first recruiting class with the new coach that we have, and he brought in a great group of guys, and they're learning. I think the defense is a little weak. The lines are both a little bit weak, but I think they'll get better throughout the year because they're getting more time to be able to play together.
Headed in the right direction.
Yeah. We're probably not going to a bowl game this year, but I think we win 4 to 5 games this year.
I love it. When the Duke-Stanford game happens as a part of the ACC, I don't care if it's in Durham or Palo Alto, we got to go.
I went to the last one because they played a home and home.
Yes, when Luck was QB at Stanford then, right?
Yeah.
I want to say he was because y'all beat the brakes off us in Durham.
Yeah, that was a rough game.
It was ugly. We had a pick 6 early in the game, and I was all giddy, and then y'all beat us like 56-7 or something.
Yeah, we had a good defense at that time. I think that was like the real. It's funny because Luck was there, and it was like that was sort of all the story. But like they were great on the line, and they have a bunch of guys that are still playing in the league that were on the line at that year. These almost 8 years ago, 10 years ago at this point. But yeah, I'd love me going out there. You guys have made a bunch of renovations to the stadium, so I'd love to see the new setup. But I'm there.
It's a totally different place. Well, thanks again, dude. As always, you're a pleasure. And I always learn something from you, which was a big part of what we talked about today. Always be willing to learn. Hopefully we'll see you in Austin, Texas soon.
Thanks for having me on the show. Great to catch up.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. This council strives to showcase unique cybersecurity leadership stories. Its mission is to demystify and simplify cybersecurity across the entire business landscape. Best practices, lessons learned, operational recommendations, it's all here. Brought to you by the Cybersecurity Council, LLC, Brian Greene and myself, Scott Brammer, will be your hosts. We have come in from the cyber wilderness, not just to share what we have learned, but to find and elevate some of the most important voices in cyber. Brian is a former Division I college football player who has experience across many cybersecurity software startups. He has a successful exit on his resume too. He's also the founder and president of this very community, the Cybersecurity Council. Myself, Scott Brammer, I'm a former Marine and active CISO, and I have 3 patents in cyber and risk. As hosts, we are here to elevate best practices and strengthen the cyber community, both for the community itself and its allies. The Cybersecurity Council has had auspicious beginnings here in the Austin, Texas community, but we are already going worldwide. Everyone should be a cyber practitioner. The views expressed on this podcast, either by us or by our guests, are our own, and they do not necessarily reflect the view of our organizations. This podcast is intended as a forum for professional knowledge, but it is not legal or regulatory advice. Always consult your legal professionals for legal and regulatory matters. And now,
assemble the council.